What I had planned this morning was not so much to share with you a homily I have prepared in the traditional sense of the word, but rather share with you some reflections on the major themes in today's gospel. And there are two themes, that stand out, in particular. And one is the notion of authority and service, and the other I'm simply going to call form and substance. But for the sake of brevity, I'm going to pass over my remarks on authority and service and just only say that, it is not a competition. It's not an either-or situation. It is a both and, that clearly those in positions of authority are placed in that position precisely to be of a service to others. And so we'll just kind of, wrap it up and suffice it to say what Jesus Christ said, that the greatest among you must be your servant. And so let's go on to form and substance. Where am I picking that up in today's gospel? Well, it has to do with, the Lord's observation about the length of the tassels on the Pharisees' cloaks. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a tassel on your cloak. Jesus had a tassel on his cloak. Remember the woman with the hemorrhage came up behind him in the crowd? If I but touch the tassel of his cloak, I will be healed. Go back into the 15th chapter of the book of Numbers, starting with verse 37, and there you see the commandment regarding tassels. God said, because see, everybody in the ancient world wore wore cloaks, but God said, but you will put tassels on your cloak, and you'll fasten them with a scarlet thread. And the purpose was to identify you as a covenant people and to remind you that your fidelity to the covenant is dependent upon obedience to my commands. So it was a sign. So what were the scribes and Pharisees doing? They're like, well, I'm more pious, I'm more devout, I'm a better Jew than you because look at how long my tassel is. And that's why Jesus said, everything you do is show. It's all form, zero substance. And that's what I want to explore with you today. And I think to simplify my remarks, as much as they can be simplified, I'm going to preface them by just using a very common, simple example of what I hope to illustrate with some of my reflections that I'm going to share with you. And so when we talk about devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, for example, the devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, has two aspects. There is the form and there is the substance of the devotion. Now, the form of the devotion can take the form of a daily rosary, and that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. But what is the substance of devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary? It is the imitation of her virtues, right? The imitation of her virtues. And so, if we don't do that, our devotion, and I'm not trying to be, excessively harsh or judgmental, but if all it is external and checking off a box of a daily rosary, but there's no attempt to even imitate her virtues, then that devotion is completely lacking in substance. It's empty. It's empty. And I think there would be enough criticism, for people gathering, to pray the rosary, and some people might have a simple pink plastic one, and somebody draws out this extravagant jeweled beads, and so that my rosary, is certainly more beautiful because I love Mary more than you. If that's your attitude, then you're better off counting on your fingers, right? Throw your rosary away. Count on your fingers. So anyhow, that's kind of a preface. What is it that I really want to get to? Well, I want to do kind of a walk through the form and the substance of the celebration of the Mass. Because, quite frankly, there is an awful lot of work that needs to be done. And I do want to preface, even that reflection by saying that, in the history of the church, in the life of the church, liturgical reform, adaptation, revision, so on and so forth, is a normal part of the life of the church. History bears that out. But what also is part of the history and reality of the church is resistance to any kind of reform or adaptation or revision. And certainly since the 1970s and the following decades, we have seen and experienced a lot. But let's just say that the liturgical reform that we are still trying to navigate through today was begun by St. Pope Pius X at the turn of the 20th century. Because see, what he observed was that you see a typical Mass in a typical parish on an ordinary Sunday, and there's the priest at the altar doing his thing. And the people were in the pews. A lot of them were praying rosaries, others were reading books. Participation was virtually zero. And the Holy Father saw that as very, very problematic. And he initiated, a movement towards reform of the liturgy of the church that would facilitate and engage the faithful in a more full, in a more conscious, in a more active way of participating. That it's not a matter of coming in, clocking in your hour while Father does his thing. I'm not going to rehearse with you because we were all there. I'm not going to rehearse with you the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and even, some aspects that are still clinging to us today like wet tissue paper. I'm not going to rehearse that because we all know what we're talking about. We've all seen the same exact thing. But I do want to go, starting with the very fundamentals, and talk about what is it we're doing. What is it that the church expects from us? Well, we kind of back up. In a remote way, we look at the form, of the Mass. When you walk into a church, it should look like a Catholic church. And that's what the church teaches. It should look like a Catholic church. It should look like a place where a sacrifice is offered. And so the way the church is designed and the way the sanctuary, is appointed, all has to point to the central reality of what it is that takes place on the altar. And because we're very visual, sensual people, we need these external signs, these external forms, that allow our heart and our mind to enter into what it is that it's about to take place. Then we get to the more specific form of the Mass. The church instructs priests that when you celebrate Mass, you open the Roman Missal. This is what you say, this is what is sung, this is what you do. And under no circumstances and for any reason may a priest change, subtract, or add anything. Anything. It's do this in memory of me. And so, you kind of talk about, how there was, kind of like a an ill-conceived notion, in our recent memory, where there had to be, liturgical commissions that had to plan the Mass. What it really amounted to was, how can we innovate, to stimulate full and active participation as the Church desires. And I say it was ill-conceived because it was completely off the mark. Because each and every Mass was already planned. All you had to do was open the Roman Missal and say that. But that's not what happened. And all of this innovation, that was, that sought to stimulate deeper participation in the sacrifice of the Mass, did completely the opposite. Because by changing and adding and subtracting, what you were doing was removing from the faithful the text of the Mass, the rubrics of the Mass, the celebration intended by the Church, as it was left to her and entrusted to her by Jesus Christ. So what were you participating in? Maybe loosely, in the substance of the Mass, but all these things did nothing but confused the substance and a loss of the sense of it. And so the Church, very anxious to encourage and facilitate, the participation of the faithful, allowed a greater use of the vernacular, so that you could actually understand what's being said and that you could respond in a language you actually know. And to be able to sing all of the ritual music, the Gloria, the Sanctus, the Agnus Dei, so on and so forth. And I say we have like a long way to go, because even though the liturgy has been made more accessible by the use of the vernacular, quite honestly, what you see still to this day is that during the Gloria, people just stand there, not moving their lips, singing nothing. Don't respond with responsorial psalm. Don't sing the Sanctus. Don't sing the Agnus Dei. And don't get me started on Catholic funerals and weddings. Have you been to a Catholic funeral or wedding lately? Like I have this panoramic view of Catholic funerals and weddings. And there's something about a wedding or a funeral. There's something about a woman in a white dress, or a coffin with a body in it that makes everyone forget what to do. And you look out into the congregation, and it's like all the Catholics are sitting like crows, not knowing when to stand, when to sit, when to kneel, and sometimes they don't even know when to respond, and they don't even sing, even though they know this stuff by heart. And what are we telling our Protestant brothers and sisters who are there to mourn with us the passing of one of our faithful, and we can't even show them how to worship as Catholics worship? We've got so much ground to cover. We are so far from the goal. But all these things are still external. And they're all meant to facilitate what the Church is truly getting at with regards to participating at the Mass. It's something that is utterly and entirely interior. Why are we here? What are we doing? What are we doing? Well, each and every one of us is baptized. And by virtue of our baptism, we have been made priests. What are priests? Priests are people who offer sacrifice. That's what a priest does. There are no exceptions. But among the priests of the Church who have been baptized into Christ, some are chosen to represent Christ in a particular way, to actually stand in his person, in persona Christi, in the celebration and the offering of the sacrifice of the Mass. And so when the priest comes to celebrate the Mass, to offer the Eucharistic sacrifice, he does so as the visible representation of the head of the body, which is the church, Jesus Christ. But see, the head alone does not offer the sacrifice, because who's the sacrifice being offered to? God the Father, to his praise, glory, and honor for our sanctification. And you don't say to God the Father, here's the head, while he's waiting for the rest of the body. We don't offer him a head, we offer him a body. We offer him Christ, the whole Christ. And so Father is not doing his thing while people look on. Rather, all of the baptized, exercising their priesthood in their own particular way, offer the whole Christ with and through the priest, who stands as a visible representation of the head. That means your offering at Mass is yourself as Christ. Did you get that? We are a body offering the Eucharistic sacrifice of Jesus Christ. The priest stands as a visible representative of the head. The people assembled are representative members of that body, and it is the whole body that not only offers to God the Father the Eucharistic sacrifice, but its whole self as an assembly, as Christ himself, to the praise and honor and glory of God the Father, and for our personal sanctification. That's what's taking place. But now we need to get just a little bit deeper, because what does the church truly mean at the end of the day? What does full and active conscious participation in the Mass mean? It's how it's translated in substance to the manner in which we live our lives. That's participation. We all know the two great commandments. We just heard them last week. The second one is like the first: love one another as you love yourselves. But the night before he died, and when he instituted the Eucharistic sacrifice, Jesus Christ said, I give you a new commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. Why the tweak? Because it required Christ being manifest in the flesh, becoming our neighbor, to show us what that love looks like. And so we take the participation in the Eucharistic sacrifice and we live its mystery in the world, in our love for one another, and in embracing the cross and its mystery in our lives.